You guys might remember that a few weeks ago I put up a video giving you guys some tips to help you figure out whether the hair loss that you are experiencing is something serious or not, or if it's something that you actually have to be worried about. And in that video I mentioned that there were a couple simple tests that you could use to help yourself figure this out at home so that you know whether it's a good time to get in touch with a professional or not. So in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you guys one of those very simple tests that you can do yourself at home. Now this is a DIY version of a clinical test that I personally use with my patients to help me figure out whether the hair loss they're experiencing is unusual or not. Now of course this test is in no way exhaustive or conclusive, mainly because there are a whole bunch of other factors that need to be considered. But nonetheless, when used in conjunction with some of the tips that I shared with you guys in my previous video, this test can definitely help you better determine whether the hair loss that you are experiencing is something that you need to get in touch with a professional about. Alright guys, let's get into it. So you may remember from my previous video on hair loss where I mentioned that each hair goes through a hair cycle, and that cycle starts with the hair growing for a number of years and then it enters a rest phase for a few months, after which it sheds in preparation for a new hair to grow in its place. Now I also did mention that at any given point in time that about 85 to 90% of your hairs should be in that first anagen growing phase, which means that at the most you should only have a maximum of 15% of your hairs in this resting telogen phase waiting to be extracted. Now as you can imagine, not all the hairs in this resting phase should be shedding at the same time, let alone on the same day. Ideally, no more than 10% should be readily shedding or easy to pull out. And so this is exactly what we're going to be testing today. We're simply trying to determine whether there is an unusually high percentage of hairs that have prematurely been pushed into the resting phase and are on the verge of being shed. Now, in order to prep your hair for this test, you want to make sure that you haven't washed your hair for at least 24 hours. Now, if you have really coily, curly, or kinky textured hair, you want to make sure that you detangle and stretch your hair either through using medium to large size twists or plaits, again about 24 hours before this test. You definitely don't want to detangle again within that 24-hour period. And you also don't want to detangle too long before that 24-hour period either. And this is simply because if you imagine that you detangle your hair 5 days before this test and you do not detangle your hair again before you do this test, you're more likely to get a positive test simply due to the amount of naturally normal shed hairs that have been accumulating in your hair for the past 5 days. Now on the flip side, if you have naturally straight or wavy textured hair, chances are your naturally shed hairs will fall out on their own with very little manipulation or very little combing or brushing. Now the aim of the game here is simple, and that's to make sure that whatever hair is being pulled out in this test came out on that day as a result of the pulling, and not just because you've had a whole bunch of shed hairs accumulating in your hair. So this test is called the pull test. Okay, we're gonna do this test in about 5 simple steps. Step number 1 is you want to identify and isolate a clump of approximately 60 hairs. Now, once you've isolated this clump of 60 hairs, you want to place them in between your thumb, your index finger, and your middle fingers, right at the base of the scalp. Once you've got a firm grip on this section of hair with your fingers at the base, you then want to firmly, but not forcefully, begin to tug away from the scalp. Now, generally speaking, only a few hairs in this telogen resting phase should be able to be pulled out in this manner. Less than 10% is considered normal. So if once you're done pulling through to the end of the hair, you have less than 6 hairs that have come out, then this is considered very normal. However, if more than 10% or more than 6 hairs that are complete and not broken are pulled away from the scalp, this constitutes a positive pull test and indicates that there is a high possibility that you are experiencing active unusual shedding. Now, you don't just want to do this on one part of your head. You can do this around different parts of your head to make sure that you get a well-rounded set of results. Now, as I mentioned earlier, not only should this test be able to help you determine whether you are experiencing active shedding, but especially when you carry out the test on different parts of your head, it will also help you to assess the severity and the location of the hair loss. Now, I do want to say that if you do have a negative pull test in that you aren't extracting more than 10% of your hairs, and so you're not experiencing active shedding, but you're noticing that you are still losing an unusual amount of hair for you, then this might be an indication that whatever hair loss it is you are experiencing is as a result of breakage and not necessarily hair loss in the form of shedding. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, outside of mechanical damage or as a result of poor hair care practices, there are still conditions that can cause abnormal excessive breakage. So if you can say hand on heart that you have actually been doing really well with looking after your hair, but you are still experiencing this breakage, then you definitely want to book in to see a professional about this. But that's everything from me today, guys. We kept it short and sweet. So let me know in the comments, how did you guys do? Also, if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click that like button for me. Also, if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my science-backed hair care tips every Friday. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.